sidewalks and the streets are going to be sanded and salted. In fact, at the church, we're going to have some salt in the nearby to make sure that the entrance of the church is salted on slick and icy days, that nobody slips and falls, to prevent them from suing us and suing us for neglect, because by not salting, we are deemed to having contributed or exposed them to injury. And you know, when you walk in the grocery store and they're mopping the floor, there are those yellow signs that say, "Beware, floor is wet." There again, that's a measure that their lawyers and the insurance company said, take. Let somebody slips and falls and hurts themselves. You can always say, we had the yellow signs up saying we're mopping the floors, be careful. So we did our part. But we also don't want to expose any of our customers to peril. A few years ago, there was a story of in the newspaper of McDonald's, someone suing McDonald's for burning themselves or scalding themselves with coffee. They took the coffee from the drive-through window, put it between their legs as you normally do as you drive. It spilled and burnt them, and they sued McDonald's for giving them hot coffee and not telling them the coffee could scald. So now on all the cups, if you buy coffee from the McDonald's takeaway, they say, beware, coffee hot, very hot. It may burn. All these are measures that we have learned the hard way in this modern day and age, measures to be taken to not expose others to peril. And so we may be quite familiar with the concept that Deuteronomy is outlining. The children of Israel were given these rules. There are a lot of laws that were given, but when you're building your new homes, make sure that your flat roofs have a parapet, have a protection, some railing. The King James Version says a battlement for the roof, so that you don't bring blood upon your house if any man should fall from your roof. Don't expose others to peril. That's what this text is saying. Don't expose others to peril. So I read in my research in the newspaper a story of an acrobat who his name is Criss Angel. The story appears in a 2017 newspaper. It was reported by ABC News in March of 2017. What had happened was that the magician, Criss Angel, known for his death-defying tricks, would get up into midair, very high in the air, and put on a straitjacket. And he would try and, while suspended upon a tightrope in the air, get out of the straitjacket. And in this particular incident, he lost consciousness while in midair, in front of a Las Vegas audience. And they report that the report was that that this could have killed him. He actually said that he when he was interviewed later, he was taken to the emergency room, and he said that, listen, I do these things to blur the line between reality and illusion, but this demonstration is real. The risks that are at stake are no joke. He could have died. And then he said cavalierly, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And for him, it was always about pushing the envelope. And Angel, the magician, attempted an aerial trick in which he hung upside down while secured in a straitjacket during this show in Las Vegas, and he swayed his body in an attempt to free himself. even as the audience knew something was off as he struggled to escape. His hands started flailing, uh, and he tried to wriggle free, and he lost consciousness in midair in front of a stunned and fully packed audience before being helped down and rushed to the hospital. He reports that once I started going up, I was told that I can begin my escape, and that's all I remember until I woke up and I was literally surrounded by paramedics and people putting things in my arm. Angel said he lost consciousness because he was not eating properly, not sleeping. He was also dehydrated. They asked him to do an MRI, but he said no. He signed the release, waiving liability, so that he could go back to work. And this is the point I want to make. He left the hospital. Um, he left the hospital early because he wanted to get back to the show and to thrill the audience with this spectacle um, of magic that has never been seen before. And within 24 hours of the failed attempt, he was suited up to give the performance another try. But here's the point I want to make. Do you think that this guy Criss Angel would have been doing this daring act if there was not a crowd who had paid money to see him do this act? Perhaps maybe the performance was in itself an immoral act. Oh no, let me put it differently. Maybe the attendance at the performance was an immoral act because the pleasure derived by that audience, the spectators, arose in great part because of the extreme danger to the individual. Now, he probably had skill, but trust me, if he was not suspended high in space, if he was suspended knee high, nobody would have attended. Nobody would have paid big money to see a guy try to wriggle out of a straitjacket while he is suspended knee high or waist high from the ground. The only reason that he was doing what he did and actually went back 24 hours after this perilous first venture out there was because people were sitting there paying. The only reason they were there because and watching and paid to watch was because the guy doing it was exposing himself to great danger. Isn't this our desire for spectacle and sometimes our attendance and our following people who place themselves in great peril? Isn't it in and of itself just our attention and our desire to see someone expose themselves to great danger? Isn't that in and of itself an immoral act for a Christian? Should we as Christians be applauding someone who's putting their life in great danger? Should we be in attendance? Should we be supporting? Because if you're not there and you were disinterested and the thousands of other people were disinterested, do you think that they would actually embark on these dangerous endeavors? The thing is that we are attracted to others who expose themselves to peril, and our frenzied support and attention of them is in and of itself encouraging them to expose themselves to peril. The Bible says, "Thou shalt not kill." Is it only meaning that we ought not to kill, that we shall not only kill um, physically, but we should not be involved in 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 in, in supporting people who place themselves in great peril. You know, when dangerous deeds are done, we we are bound to provide every possible safeguard, but to induce a man unnecessarily to risk life and limb and to omit precautions is essentially murder. And every person who, by our subscription, assisted or by his presence encouraged such a risk of life, perhaps is guilty of the violation of the commandment, thou shalt not kill. If we are bound to guard against common accidents, such as the fall off the roof, by the placing of a parapet or a battlement that none might step over unawares, we are equally bound to keep people out of danger as much as we can. You don't need a law to prohibit the horrible exhibitions like the magicians. There ought to be enough humanity in the world to lead us to denounce the proposal that a fellow man, a fellow creature, should run the risk of falling from a terrible height, to be dashed into pieces merely to gratify a vulgar curiosity. And you know, folks, we may be more or less guilty of such conduct in a moral and a spiritual sense. I read another story in the newspaper while I was researching this about the story of Michelle Carter. This was reported in the CBS News in 2017. A lot was happening in 2017 because this guy also, the Chris Angel, he also he was March the 13th, 2017 when this report came out. And here on June the 16th, 2017, the story of Michelle Carter. Michelle Carter was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter for the death of her 18-year-old friend, Conrad Roy. Roy took his own life, and investigators found he took his own life in July of 2014. And 3 years later, investigators found thousands of texts from Carter on his phone, many of them encouraging him to kill himself. This lady, Michelle Carter and Conrad Roy met in 2012, and though they lived an hour apart in Massachusetts here in the United States, they communicated almost exclusively via texts, online, and by phone. And the case, which was being followed nationwide, hinges on the power of words, Michelle Carter's words, and whether they could be deadly. At the heart of the case is the question of whether Michelle Carter's texts and messages pushed Conrad Roy to take his life, or if he would have done it anyway. She basically encouraged him to commit suicide. I also found another story. This is now October 9, 2024. The use of the date rape drug on campuses. It was reported here in a local newspaper um, that Jane Davis, a first-year student, Jane Davis, attended an off-campus party in February of 2024, and the next day she woke up in hospital. Davis was drugged at the party she attended with her friends that night, the night before. And the party was hosted by the Colorado State University's chapter of Phi Delta Theta, a fraternity, at an off-campus house. The party wasn't supposed to be any different from the other parties that Davis had attended during her first year, and Davis was familiar with the fraternity, and she never felt uncomfortable in any way in her previous interactions with the members of the fraternity. And she felt that this was one fraternity that she thought she could go to a party and would feel comfortable setting her drink down and thinking that no one would touch it. That's the level of comfort that she had with the fraternity. So she and a friend brought their own drink containers, only one of which was open. Davis said her friend drank from the container when they first arrived, but no one else did for roughly half an hour before Davis drank from the cup. And then she says, I became completely intoxicated about 3 minutes after that. They couldn't tell what was going on with me. Uh, the level of the apparent intoxication and the speed at which it set in concerned Davis's friends, so they decided to leave the party and return to their dorms. They took Davis to a friend's room in the dorm, and she kept getting worse and worse. She couldn't sit up straight. She kept falling over. She couldn't form words, couldn't function at all. And eventually, the roommates took her to the emergency room, and they basically found out that she had been given the date rape drug, Rofinipol. That's how you think you say it, without her knowledge and consent. And here's the point: the person who put that drug in her drink was exposing her to peril. So, as Christians, how does this apply to us? We may be outraged by these stories that we've heard, completely outraged. But let me ask you a question. How many times have you smiled at someone telling a doubtful story, a story that is you that you considered a lie? And how many times have you encouraged that person to repeat that story just for fun? Many years ago, I was counseled never, if you know a person is prone to lie for anything, don't force them to lie. Don't ask them to repeat themselves if you know it's going to be a lie. Because you don't want them to deepen that lie and dig deeper and deeper. Maybe maybe we've introduced other people to doubtful questions about their faith, which has proved too high for them and have led to their faith staggering and their minds falling into unbelief. Maybe we've spoken to somebody and given them a mind-bending scenario religiously that has caused them to question their faith. Some writers and preachers sometimes greatly encourage tightrope speculations about mysterious subjects. And those things cause no end to mischief. I've heard preachers ask some strange questions. Maddening speculations about Jesus and his life and his ministry. Sometimes a skeptical remark repeated in the pulpit has placed many a youth upon a dizzy height and caused their ruin. And sometimes the man who uttered it has no idea that he is doing harm. Sometimes the more experienced Christians whose faith has been tested sometimes take positions that are safe for an established Christian to take, but do not realize that if those same positions are taken by those who are fledgling in the faith, it could be deadly. What about if we are lukewarm towards the issues of religion? And because we are so lukewarm toward our faith and our religion, we have tempted others to remain careless and indifferent while their souls are in jeopardy. Sometimes many of us professors of faith encourage others to delay accepting Christ as their personal savior. And sometimes by our own lukewarmness, we affect others, place them in peril spiritually. Is it possible that some strong minds may, by their example and urgings, induce the weaker minds or the people of the weaker sort to do that which is eminently hazardous to them? And so, as Christians, our responsibility is that we ought to be careful not to lead our weaker brothers and sisters or those fledgling in the faith, or even those established in the faith, not to lead them into slippery places by sometimes going there ourselves. Now, this is where I get a little bit more direct. If at any time we join in the popular admiration of a man or a woman because they are successful and have achieved a high position or are raised to high positions, although their characters are evil and their conduct more than questionable, are we not acting like those who lift up their shouts of applause when the acrobat is pacing along a slender line at a giddy height? Is it the part of a Christian to applaud nothing but virtue? You know, many a times we want to emulate, we want to use an example, people whose characters are questionable, who have are demonstrably vulgar and profane, men and women. Even though we know that their speech, their actions, their life is of no example, but we want to lift them up with this applause, like we are applauding that acrobat who is putting his life at risk in peril simply to entertain us. And shouldn't we only be applauding that which is virtuous? We have to do more to encourage men and women, young men and women, men and women, who are walking in a way that is consistent with the mind of God. We shouldn't be putting people in peril when we know that they are walking in a way that is contrary to the mind of God. And folks, we got to be careful what we celebrate and what we applaud as Christians. Because in doing so, we could be placing somebody else's life in peril. Sometimes we do so, we place somebody's life in peril because we are excited at the notion of somebody falling and slipping. We want to display our skill. We want to display how clever and smart we are. Yet that display of cleverness and smartness could be the very thing that causes somebody to slip and fall. We want the liar to repeat the lie so that we can say he's lying. Don't we know that by repeating that lying, you may be solidifying the path of just basically living a life of falsehood? We may be so lukewarm in our faith, and we may be so cavalier in our lukewarmness that we send a message to somebody else to be lukewarm if they want to be like us or to follow us, only to place their life in peril. You may want to dabble with certain things, horoscopes and spiritualism, and I know some people want to dabble with talking in seances, talking to the dead, and you want to dabble with all this stuff and not understanding. Not only are you placing yourself as a Christian in peril, but somebody watching you or listening to you or emulating you or following your footsteps may go down that path. So I've shared with you 3 stories from the newspapers that have addressed this tendency of ours to applaud, to shout and celebrate, to act in a manner that places other people's lives in peril. Just think about it, a young woman telling her friend to commit suicide, encouraging him to commit suicide. There's another story told here in England, carried by the BBC, of a young lady, 14 years of age, who took her own life. And when they investigated what could have led her to do that it was simple. She followed Instagram accounts that were so morbid, that showed vivid pictures of people committing suicide, and the ugliness and the state of their bodies after they were found. She followed it to the extent that she was so sucked into that world that after dinner, a wonderful dinner with the family, she went to bed, and the following day, her mother found her body. She committed suicide. I've read stories of how friends encouraged their friends to rape and actually stood around in a circle applauding and encouraging the violence of rape. And when asked why he did it, it was simply because the people were applauding me. He placed his life in peril. He brought hurt and injury upon another individual in the process, simply because there were people in the crowd applauding him and encouraging him. Folks, we've got to be careful what we celebrate and what we applaud. May God help us that by our conduct, by our speech, we do not place other people's lives in peril. Even what we pursue for entertainment, we don't place other people's lives in peril. Are there any more? Is there anybody with a contribution to make? Anyone with a contribution?
I do have a a contribution. I think with the examples that you shared, um, different people had been exposed to content related to what they did to themselves. Um, and I'm reminded that we should also safeguard um, our portals. Or I know Ellen White talks about the portals we must watch, the things that we view, hear, and choose to entertain. Um, because especially in the entertainment industry, we don't know um, how clever, or we're beginning to know how clever they are at allowing us to sign off on nonsense, um, like violence and um, endangering people or infidelity. Um, a lot of the media is very creative at having us tolerate things that the Lord clearly doesn't want, and also that it's causing us to tolerate peril for others or endangering people. You know, we or when we're watching something um, that is like a thriller type of show, mama, or video, we find ourselves siding with someone in that movie, even though it's very violent, and inside we are excited when the person we're rooting for prevails. Um, but we we don't know. We think we're enjoying a movie when we're really just becoming more tolerant to um, hurting others or people hurting themselves, you know?
Yep. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for that contribution. Anybody else? Well, if there are no contributions, I'd like to thank you all for um, logging in. I pray that the lesson for today may have an effect in our lives as we proceed from this point forward. We must be mindful that maybe our conduct, our speech, our desires um, could be placing other people in peril, including ourselves. Just remember that if you come across a story that you'd like us to explore, you can send it to the Bible in the newspaper email address tb.tnpod@gmail.com. And I'd like to receive those and go through them and read them and uh, share them in our next in one of our episodes. So until next week, Friday, thank you all for logging in and share this link with others also on a Friday as we explore um, the Bible and the newspaper, as we look at what happens around us through the perspective of God's word. May the Lord bless you and keep you until we meet again. Have a good day and good evening.